Hey guys, your Tech Admin here, and today I'm excited to say it's finally time to do another computer build on this channel. Now those of you who have watched some of my previous videos, you may recognize that PC case in the background, but if not, don't worry. That is a computer that I built a few years ago for my dad. It was originally used as an NVR for his IP security cameras. We've since decided to move away from IP security cameras and go with CCTV cameras and a DVR. So that meant this machine had no use anymore, and my dad's been wanting to have a new desktop machine, so I decided to go ahead and take this existing machine and upgrade it. So as you can see here, we have all the components laid out nicely, and we'll go through them real quick and then we'll get started with the build. So the first thing we have here is a MSI B350 PCMate motherboard. This is of course a lower end motherboard, and I'll explain the decisions for these components here in a bit. But this is just a standard AMD socket AM4 motherboard, B350 chipset. Nothing really special. It's actually a pretty cheap motherboard, but it had pretty good reviews, so that's why we went with that one. Next component on the list is the AMD Ryzen 5 1600 CPU. This is a 6-core CPU with a 3.2 gigahertz base clock and a 3.6 gigahertz boost clock. This is a very well rated CPU at this point, and it is very, very affordable, especially when you're comparing similar processors from Intel's offerings. This is actually a really good system, and this is my first Ryzen build, so I'm excited to get into this and see how this thing does. Next up, we've got the Cooler Master Hyper T2 cooler. This is a very popular cooler, and again, it's on the lower end, but it will absolutely get the job done. After that, we've got 16 gigabytes of XPG DDR4 2666 memory. This is, again, a lower end brand as far as I can tell. I've never really heard of XPG before. But again, it had pretty decent ratings, and I think it fit this build pretty well, so that's why I went with it. And finally, we have a Samsung 860 EVO 250 gig SSD. This needs no introduction. These are really good SSDs at this point, so yeah, fast storage is definitely a must. Now this brings us to the things we're going to be saving from the original build. This was originally an Intel build, and it had some hard drive failures over the years, especially with the NVR software writing so often to that drive. But we are going to be saving the primary hard drive and the power supply from this system. Everything else is going to be taken out and replaced with the new stuff. So yeah, without much further to say, let's go ahead and get this build started. I'm ready to get my hands on this. All right, let's go ahead and get this puppy cracked open and get started on this build. So there is a good look at the inside. As you can see, it's not the best cable management wise, but with this being a cheap case, there's not a ton you can do in that kind of situation. So yeah, I'm not the most proud of how everything ended up set up in here, but again, what can you say? So let's go ahead and start removing some components. Alright, let's go ahead and get this processor socketed in. We will lift the little arm here. There we go. And in comes the processor. We'll line up the little arrow on the corner there with the dot on the motherboard. Very simple. We'll just line it up and slide it in. Give it a little wiggle, make sure it's seated. And there it is. Alright, next up we'll go ahead and get the cooler installed. I'm going to go ahead and see how this stock cooler does. Cleaned off the factory thermal paste, and we'll apply some fresh thermal paste to the CPU there and go ahead and install it. If this guy doesn't perform as well as I think it might, then I'll go ahead and swap over to the T2. Otherwise, I may end up just running this, so we just have to see how that goes. So let's go ahead and get that thermal paste on there and get this cooler slapped on. So the thermal paste I'm using is this little tube of Arctic Silver 5. You can get this pretty cheap if you look on Amazon or Newegg. It's not very expensive stuff, but it's much better than what they put on the cooler from the factory. So we'll go ahead and just get a dab of this on there. And when applying thermal paste, there's a lot of different methods that people have, but what I've done most of the time is just put a nice pea-sized blob kind of right in the center. Something like that, maybe a little more. Something like that. That should be plenty. That may actually be a little too much, but that's not a big deal. All right, so let's go ahead and get that cooler on. Just a little note, I did have to remove these little pieces from the board. These are, I'm assuming, for another style of AMD socket. So I'll pop these off. And this stock cooler should bolt up right to that existing bracket, as you can see there. So let me go ahead and put her on. So there we have the cooler installed. It actually takes quite a bit of pressure to install that cooler. That's pretty impressive considering the stocky Intel coolers are like these lame little push pin design. This thing seems much more sturdy. I'm hoping it's going to perform a little better than the Intel coolers as well. I've never actually compared stock coolers between the brands ever, so this is all pretty new and interesting to me. We'll go ahead and plug the fan here into the fan header on the motherboard. Alright, next up we will get our memory installed. Here we have the slots on the board, and as you can see here, there's a helpful little guide. I don't know how well you can see it, but it says we should install DIMMs A2 and B2 first. So since we only have 2 sticks, those are the ones we will install. Alright, we'll start by popping open these little latches, sliding the memory in, making sure our little notch lines up there on the motherboard. Very easy. And applying a little bit of pressure until it clicks into place. Repeat the same thing for the other stick. That's it, memory installed. Alright, next thing I have to do is actually rearrange the standoffs here in the case so they match the holes in the motherboard. This is going to be a bit of a fiddly process, so I'll do this off camera. It's not very interesting, just basically moving the standoff so I can mount the motherboard. Alright, I've got the standoffs rearranged. And now it's time for the most important part of the motherboard installation. And no, it's not installing the motherboard. It's making sure you put in the faceplate or the I/O shield. I know a lot of people, myself included, first time you build a computer, completely forget to put in the I/O shield until you get it all done and you turn around and there's a big gaping hole around the ports in the back. It's happened to me, it's happened to several other people, so don't forget to install the I/O shield. Another important thing is to make sure you don't get the I/O shield upside down. Just check your motherboard and make sure it's facing the right way in the case before you pop it in. Alright, now it's time to get the board in. A good note is it's really easy to handle the board by holding it by the cooler. And it shouldn't hurt it as long as you're not too rambunctious with it. So it's a good anchor point to hold it from while you're installing it. So let's go ahead and pop this puppy in. Alright, after a bit of work, the motherboard is securely mounted. So now the last thing to do is just cable everything up. The most important thing is going to be the cabling for the front panel. For that, I'm going to be referring to the motherboard's manual, of course, to figure out the pinout. And if you add the manual to your case, that'll help as well to tell you what the front audio leads are. Fortunately, I don't have the manual to this case since it's a used case, so I'm gonna have to figure that out. So that's gonna be fun, but I'll go ahead and get everything wired up and nice and cable managed, and I'll see you guys in a bit. Everything is now wired in and connected up. I've even managed to put the SSD and the hard drive in. So everything is in the computer now, except you may have noticed one thing is missing in this general area. That's right, I've taken the power supply out. The power supply that was in there, that was originally in this machine, has died. So it's actually about a week later, and I have purchased a new power supply. This one's much better than the one that was in there, so it's a good thing anyway. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and unbox it, and we'll slap it in there. Let's get started. Alright, now I've got the new power supply installed. Everything else is connected and set up and sort of cable managed. Like I said, the cable management in this case isn't the best, but now we're ready to install Windows, so let's go ahead and get started with that. Alright, so that's it. Windows is installed and the system is complete. We'll go ahead and do a final boot, and that'll be it for this video. And that is it. So thanks for watching, everybody, and until next time, take it easy.